Tamaham Bhajami Govindamari Prusha Tamaham Bhajami Pandasu Koti Shatavatsara Sampragamyo Vayodatmi Manaso Muni Pungavana Sokyasti Yatra Varisinna Vichintatatve Govindamani Prusha Tamaham Bhajami Govindamani Prusha Tamaham Bhajami
Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Yashodanandana Braja Jananandana Yashodanandana Braja Jananandana स्वात्तरं चित्रिव्राजगचार्यश्चित्तर सदस्यमान भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी प्रभुपाद की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णववृंद की जय। नामाचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद से अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गौ गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरिवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय। नवद्वीप धाम की जय। स्वामी तो भक्तवृंद की जय। गंगा माई की जय। जमुना माई की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। स्वामी तो भक्तवृंद की जय। All glories to the assembled Lord. All glories to the assembled Lord. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Mother Malati. Hare Krishna. Good to have you. Please accept my humble obeisances.
My obeisances to you and to everyone else. Srivas, are you still in India? Or are you back in Africa?
Hare Krishna, my obeisances. I'm in Ghana.
Oh, wonderful. Nice.
Thank you so much, Mother.
How are you and how are all of the devotees?
Hare Krishna's mercy, everybody is fine.
Wow, wonderful.
Hare
Yeah.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So, Mother, I'm going to put the verse on the screen and we may start.
Okay,
Okay, Hare Krishna. Thank you.
I'm just getting the verse on my book. Also.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Okay. I should begin?
Yes, Mother. Yes, you may.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Well, I'll just read the Sanskrit and then one of you can, are we doing everything in English? Do we need translation? I can't remember.
No translations, only in English.
Okay. Sarva sadguna mahatmayi esa krishna manuvrataha ranti deva iva dara oyayati reva dharmikaha. So the synonyms, not the cinnamon, the synonyms. Sarva sadguna mahatmayi, glorified by all godly attributes. Esa, this child, Krishnam, like Lord Krishna, Anuvrataha, a follower in his footsteps. Ranti Deva, Iwa, like, Udara, in the matter of magnanimity. Yayati, Iwa, like, Dharmika, concerning religion. Translation by His Divine Grace. This child will be almost as good as Lord Krishna by following in his footsteps. In magnanimity, he will become as great as King Rantideva. And in religion, he will be like Maharaj Yayati. Purport. The last instructions of Lord Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is that one should give up everything and follow in the footsteps of the Lord alone. Less intelligent persons do not agree to this great instruction of the Lord, as ill luck would have it. But One who is actually intelligent catches up this sublime instruction and is immediately benefited. Foolish people do not know that association is the cause of acquiring qualities. Association with fire makes an object hot, even in the material sense. Therefore, association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead makes one qualified like the Lord. As we have discussed previously, one can achieve 78% of the godly qualities of the Lord's intimate association, to just follow the instructions of the Lord to associate with the Lord. The Lord is not a material object whose presence one has to feel for such association. The Lord is present everywhere and at all times. It is quite possible to have this association simply by following his instruction, because the Lord and his instruction and the Lord and his name, fame, attributes, and paraphernalia are all identical with him, being absolute knowledge. Maharaj Bricket associated with the Lord, even from the womb of his mother up to the last day of his valuable life, and thus he acquired all the essential good qualities of the Lord in all perfection. Ranti Deva, an ancient king prior to the Mahabharata period, referred to by Narada Muni while instructing Sanjaya, as mentioned in the Mahabharata, Drona Parva 67. He was a great king, liberal for hospitality and distribution of foodstuff. Even Lord Sri Krishna praised his acts of charity and hospitality. He was blessed by the great Vashistha Muni for supplying him cold water, and thus he achieved the heavenly planet. He used to supply fruits, roots, and leaves to the rishis, and thus he was blessed by them with fulfillment of his desires. Although a Kshatriya by birth, he never ate flesh in his life. He was especially hospitable to Vashistha Muni, and by his blessings only he attained the higher planetary residence. He is one of those pious kings whose names are remembered in the morning and evening. Yayati, the great emperor of the world and the original forefather of all great nations of the world, who belong to the Aryan and Indo-European stock. He is the son of Maharaj Nahusha, and he became the emperor of the world due to his elder brother becoming a great and liberated saintly mystic. He ruled over the world for several thousands of years and performed many sacrifices and pious activities recorded in history, although his early youth was very lustful and full of romantic stories. He fell in love with Devayani, the most beloved daughter of Sukracharya. Devayani wished to marry him, but at first he refused to accept her because of her being a daughter of a Brahmana. According to Shastra, a Brahmana could marry the daughter of a Brahmana. They were very much cautious about Vana Samskara population in the world. Sukracharya amended this law of forbidden marriage, induced Emperor Yayati to accept Devayani. Devayani had a girlfriend named Sarmista, who also fell in love and induced Emperor Yayati to accept Devyani. So Sukracharya forbade Emperor Yayati to call Sarmista into his bedroom, but Yayati could not strictly follow his instructions. He secretly married Sarmista also and begot sons by her. When this was known by Devayani, she went to her father and lodged a complaint. Yayati was so much attached to Devayani And when he went to his father-in-law's place to call her, Sukracharya was angry with him and cursed him to become impotent. Yayati begged his father-in-law to withdraw his curse, but the sage asked Yayati to ask youthfulness from his sons and let them become old as a condition of his becoming potent. He had 5 sons, 2 from Devyani and 3 from Sharmista. From his 5 sons, namely 1, Yadu, 2, Turvashu, 3, Druhyu, 4, Anu, and 5, Puru. 5 famous dynasties, namely the Yadu dynasty, the Yavana, the Turk dynasty, the Bozha dynasty, the Malecha dynasty, Greek, and the Purava dynasty, all emanated to spread all over the world. He reached the heavenly planets by dint of his pious acts, but he fell down from there because of his self-advertisement and criticizing other great souls. Very important to note. Another too much full of himself, and even worse, criticizing other great souls. After his fall, his daughter and grandson bestowed upon him their accumulated virtues. By the help of his grandson and friend Shivi, he was again promoted to the heavenly kingdom, becoming one of the assembly members of Yamaraj, with whom he is staying as a devotee. He performed more than 1,000 different sacrifices, gave in charity very liberally, and was a very influential king. His majestic power was felt all over the world. His youngest son agreed to forward him his youthfulness when he was troubled with lustful desires, even for 1,000 years. Finally, he became detached from worldly life and returned the youthfulness again to his son Puru. He wanted to hand the kingdom over to Puru, but his noblemen and subjects did not agree. But when he explained to his subjects the greatness of Puru, they agreed to accept Puru as the king, and thus Emperor Yayati retired from family life and left home for the forest. Again, the translation. This child will be almost as good as Lord Sri Krishna by following in his footsteps. In magnanimity, he will become as great as King Rantideva, and in religion, he will be like Maharaj Yayati. So you can remove this if you want. Om Agyan Timarandasya Janana Sakalaya Chakshumilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Vaspachata Satarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha Kalpa Tarubhishcha Kripa Sindhu Bhayivyacha Patitanam Pavanivyo Vaishnaveyo Namo Namaha. So it gives me both great pleasure and intimidation to be with all of you. The great pleasure is your wonderful saintly association, but the intimidation is that you're also much more advanced than myself, and I feel like a foolish child babbling in front of you. And sometimes people will say, well, I'm just speaking for my own purification. And I can honestly say that's the case here. I basically stick to Prabhupada's words, And I also appreciate the chance to study, the particular chapters that are being offered a little further. And this particular chapter is, every single chapter in this first canto of the Bhagavatam is extraordinary. Why do I say that? Because you could say, well, the entire Bhagavatam is extraordinary. And I also agree, that is a fact. But this first canto was written, translated, and the purports provided prior to Srila Prabhupada's America. And when you read these purports, just like I was reading through the whole chapter earlier today, and I'm like, my God, this is here and now. This is happening as I sit here and read. How did Prabhupada foresee all of this? And then I remembered, he said, I only know what Krishna wants me to know. And when I sit down to write, I pick up my pen and Krishna speaks to me in my ear. Krishna knows past, present, and future. And he was giving Prabhupada all the ammunition, all the knowledge he needed to present the Srimad Bhagavatam to, but we're like aliens. There's a lot of talk now about aliens. And even the National Aerospace Association, and they're agreeing that there are aliens, that there's life outside of the Earth planet, that there's other living creatures. So, we're being given this, but we're like aliens because we're so far removed from Lord Krishna. Thus, we're also referred to as fallen and conditioned souls. The Bhagavatam, it's the essence of all Vedic literature because it contains all palatable instructions and authentic versions of different activities of the Lord and his devotees. And it was delivered by Sukadeva Goswami. So, those who aren't strictly in the Vaishnava discipline should not make a business of the Bhagavatam, like, Bhagavatam Sapta, etc., and become a cause. In so doing, a non-Vaishnava presenting the Bhagavatam becomes a cause of spiritual death for so many listeners by misrepresentation. Because they have not heard correctly, they have misinterpreted. There should be no interpretations, just like we have Bhagavad Gita as it is. We can say the same about the Bhagavatam if the speaker and the reader are pure in heart. And if they're not fully connected to Krishna, that is their goal. And that goal will be realized through the Bhagavatam. In the Gita, it says that the Lord says, the purpose of all the Vedas is to know him, Lord Krishna. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is Lord Krishna himself in the form of recorded knowledge. We have the Lord Krishna Bhagavata, and we have the book Bhagavata. Bhagavata meaning about the Lord. And it contains all historical facts of all times in relation with Sri Krishna. Not necessarily in any chronological order, because it's not all earth-centered. It goes out much further than we can into the cosmic atmosphere. I mean, this particular part of the cosmos that we're in is only 1/4 of the total of creation, and 3/4 of it is the spiritual world. We're just little, tiny, inconceivably small entities, and yet we think we're everything. Recently, just like on Christmas Day, they launched a new space shuttle with carrying a brand new, incredibly large telescope. Previously, you may know this, it's called the Hubble. So the Hubble was a huge, large space telescope in space, but not quite that far in space, but it was far enough, and it gave so many previously unknown images and facts about the world beyond our little tiny universe. So this new one is like gigantic, and it's like more than 1 million miles out in space, 1 million miles away from Earth. and it has its own orbit. And they're hoping to get answers to the cosmic origins of life. But actually, they don't need that telescope. Of course, it's really interesting, I have to admit, you see all these things never before seen, but open up the Bhagavatam and you'll see through your eyes by reading, you'll see through your ears by hearing, all that is meant to be known and should be known. All the historical facts of all times in relation for Krishna. And we understand that spiritual life begins with inquiry and continues in that matter. We have the beautiful example of Lord Brahma inquiring directly from the Lord. And we have the Chatur Shloki that's giving us the essence of the Bhagavatam through the questions, the inquiries of Lord Brahma. The qualifications of both the speaker and the audience, eagerness to hear, eagerness to speak the truth, and both being respectful. These are the qualifications. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur commented that today it is in fashion. Now, consider this. He's saying today it is in fashion. And again, this is speaking to the moment. Today it is in fashion to be deceived by those who, in the name of Dharma, divert people. True devotees don't speak to satisfy their audiences. Keep this in mind. True devotees don't speak to satisfy their audiences. They don't deceive people. Rather, pure devotees reveal the flaws of cheaters who love to transgress. Only lucky people learn to be cautious after listening to the words of saints. In other words, the caution is not about the saints, but take caution in hearing from unsaintly persons. Although the words of genuine devotees may seem to contradict our current preferences and experiences, however, they are very auspicious to us. In other words, the truth is auspicious. Maharaj Parikshit knew that the curse of the Brahmana's son upon him was unjust. He knew it, everyone knew it. But he didn't want to counteract it because he also knew the age of Kali had just begun. And the first symptom of the age, namely the degradation of the Brahmana community, had also begun. And he didn't want to interfere with the current of time. So he prepared himself to meet death very cheerfully and very properly. Important point. He prepared himself to meet death very cheerfully and very properly. This is how it is for devotees. Just yesterday morning, 1 a.m, our time, Eastern time, one godbrother who is highly learned godbrother, Dulal Chandra Prabhu, he left his body 1 a.m. in the morning. He wasn't lamenting. Those around, his wife actually wrote, she posted the news that he had, before he died, that he was on his way to depart. And she said, please don't, pray that he gets well, because it wasn't going to happen. Please pray that he can continue his service to Srila Prabhupada in his next life. Please pray for his auspicious onward journey. This is devotees. We're not unhappy about death. It doesn't deter us because we understand what death is. It's just like a change of bodies. And if we've been actually preparing ourselves, we'll get a spiritual body that will never decay. And we'll be living constantly in association with the Supreme Lord and his devotees. Gyanamadak Chuka. So this means spiritual knowledge imparted by Sukadev. So Maharaj Parikshit and Sukadev Goswamis were very serious performers of the process of chanting and the process of hearing. And therefore, both of them were successful in their laudable attempt. And the sages of Naimisharanya, they were also successful due to their, Prabhupada describes, their ardent hearing. Their ardent hearing from Sukadev means they weren't sitting there distracted by, well, of course, they didn't have little, distractions like these little devices that we have, but, they had their minds and they could have been distracted by their minds, but they were ardently hearing. It meant no distraction, fully attentive. When the Lord appeared in the womb of Parikshit's mother, he very vividly saw him in the womb. It was right before his appearance. And the Lord maintained his reputation of being affectionate to and protecting his devotees. That's this word, Dramagup. So the Lord is affectionate to his devotees and he protects them. It's in the 11th verse of this chapter. And Parikshit was just about to take birth. Thus he was already 10 months in the womb. Dasamasasya. And the Lord disappeared from where he was situated without going anywhere else because he was Vibhu, means all powerful. And then after attracting the mind of Parikshit, he disappeared. Hari, the attractor. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says he entered in and then disappeared like a deceitful night prowler. In other words, a thief, to steal Parikshit's mind. This is an applied metaphor. So the Lord represents all living beings, the aquatics, the plants, the trees, reptiles, birds, animals, and man. And every one of them is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. We understand this from Bhagavad Gita 14:4. And specifically, the king, being the representative of the Supreme Lord, is duty bound to give proper protection to every one of these living beings. And a king like Maharaj Yudhisthira, who was the personality of goodness personified. This was taken from one of the purports, personality of goodness. He wanted everyone under his administration, especially the human beings, who have a better developed consciousness to become devotees of Lord Krishna. We often hear about this rare birth, this rare human birth. It is very rare. There's 8,400,000 species of life, but 8 million of them are so many other types of creatures and plants, animals, aquatics, four-legged, no-legged, etc. Only 400,000 species of life, very rare. And why? Because we have that developed consciousness where we can actually find out, as Lord Brahma did through inquiry, who we are, where we have come from, what is our business here, and what is our relationship with the Supreme Lord. Maharaj Yudhisthira's motto of administration was good for all citizens. For as a personified goodness, he knew perfectly well what is actually good for them. And he conducted his administration on that principle, not on the Raksashi demoniac principle of sense gratification, not by the newfound, we have this now, I don't know if it's headed over to Ghana yet, they call the woke culture. People woke up, they're suddenly finding things they didn't know before, but all based on the mind, the senses, the body, the false ego. So it's not awakeness at all. It's actually darkness because they don't know what it is to be awake. We know that from Bhagavad Gita. As an ideal king, he had no personal ambition. There was no place for sense gratification because all of his senses at all times were engaged in loving service of the Supreme Lord. And that include partial service to the living entities who are the parts and parcels of the complete whole. So we understand there are different lokas, or higher planets, scattered all over the earth, both material and spiritual. And a person can reach them by dint of his work in the present life, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 9:25. There's no forceful entrance allowed into the spiritual world. The material sciences and engineers who have discovered vehicles to travel over a few thousand miles in outer space, they're not going to be allowed entry. They can't even get there. as mentioned earlier, this James Webb, that's the name of that new space telescope. It was launched into outer space orbit, deep outer space, as mentioned, roughly 1 million miles away from the planet Earth, and it cost at least $10 billion. Great achievement, but nowhere near the achievements of the Supreme Lord and Creator. So there are two things in the world which can satisfy the living entities. One is when one is materially engrossed, he is satisfied as well as by sense gratification. So he's satisfied by sense gratification, but also frustrated when it eludes him. But when one is fully liberated from the conditions of the material modes, he is satisfied only by rendering loving service for the satisfaction of the Lord. And this means the living being is constitutionally a servitor, not one who is served. This is the constitutional position of the living entity. It was described that the whole material world is full of hungry living beings. But that hunger was given notation. The hunger is not for good food, shelter, or sense gratification. The hunger is for spiritual atmosphere. So in the Bhagavad Gita 8:16, the Lord says that even in the topmost planet of the universe, namely Brahmaloka, where the duration of life is multiplied by millions of years in the earthly calculation, one cannot satisfy his hunger. Such hunger can only be satisfied when the living being is situated in immortality, our constitutional position. There was a nice comment about the Brahma Samhita from the 5th chapter, that the Supreme Lord Govinda, by one of his plenary portions, enters, here's the part, he enters into the halo of the universe. Isn't that beautiful? That Govinda, in one of his plenary portions, enters into the halo of the universe and distributes himself as Paramatma, or super soul, not only within the heart of every living being, but also within every atom of the material elements. Therefore, for the Lord, there's nothing but spiritual existence. And similarly, there's nothing except spiritual existence for the pure devotee of the Lord in his intimate relationship with the Lord. So the Lord is mentioned here as the supreme living being, unlimited by time and space. Every living being, all of us, we're limited by time and space. Not necessarily great outer space. We're just limited within the space we created for ourselves by our own mental concoctions. Even though a living being is qualitatively one with the Lord, quantitatively, there's a great difference. Prabhupada uses the expression several times, a gulf of difference between the Supreme Lord and the common individual soul. So the astronomical calculations of stellar influence upon a living being, it's not supposition, but they're factual. And this is confirmed in the Bhagavatam, that every living being is controlled by the laws of nature at every moment, just as a citizen is controlled by the influence of the state. The state laws, they're grossly observed, but the laws of material nature, being subtle to our gross understanding, cannot be experienced grossly. The law of material nature is so subtle that every part of our body is influenced by the respective stars, and a living being obtains our working bodies to fulfill our terms of imprisonment. By the imprisonment means our terms of time in the body, in the material world. So we refer to as imprisonment. So get this working body in terms of imprisonment by the manipulation of such astronomical influence. In other words, a man's destiny is ascertained by the birth time constellation of stars, and a factual horoscope is made by a learned astrologer. Now, by learned astrologer, we're not talking about somebody getting a computer program or just because somebody knows a little bit of that science. No, it's a great science, and you must be a great devotee to fully comprehend that science. And even though it is a great science, actually it was abandoned by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who himself was actually a learned astrologist, according to Vedic calculations. So, this astrology, devotees get really curious about it. Even Prabhupada sometimes would joke, because we were discussing various dynamics, and he would say, okay, let's have some fun, call the astrologer. In other words, unless you're a pure devotee and able to actually calculate accurately, it's just that, it's some fun. Maharaj Pariksit, or even the personality of Godhead, they appear in certain constellations of good stars, and thus the influence is exerted upon the body, taking birth at an auspicious moment. For example, we had Lord Chaitanya in recent times, comparatively recent times. And he was very reluctant to come out of the womb of the mother, and he chose a specifically auspicious time to appear. The most auspicious constellation of stars take place during the birth are the appearance of the Lord in this material world. And Prabhupada comment, specifically it's called Jayanti, a word not to be abused for other purposes. In other words, we don't take birth called Jayanti. The Jayanti is not the same as a material birth, which depends upon material combinations of different secretions. Some scars of the school of Sanatana Dharma are highly suitable for creating an atmosphere for taking advantage of the good stellar influences, and therefore highly recommended this Garbhodan Samskara, which is the beginning of all pious acts, to receive a good and pious, intelligent class of men in human society. So the Garbhodan Samskara takes place before conception, it's part of the conception, and it's simply there to increase a good population. And there will be peace and prosperity in the world when there is a good and sane population. Otherwise, Prabhupada said there's hell and disturbance, only because of unwanted, insane population addicted to sense indulgence. So here we have the truth spoken bluntly by the pure devotee. So there's a need for an intelligent class of brahmanas who are expert in performing the purificatory processes prescribed in the system of the Varnashram Dharma. And unless these purificatory processes are performed, there's no possibility of good population. In the age of Kali, the entire population of the world is Sudra quality or even lower for lack of these purificatory processes. And even while attempting to perform the purificatory processes, due to so many unfortunate habits and unfortunate association, even then, it's not guaranteed that it will be effective. One wonderful devotee, Ravinda Sarup Prabhu, when he joined, he already had a son previous to coming to Krishna consciousness. And then after joining, he was very attracted to all the processes of purification, the chanting of the mantras, the Hare Krishna mantra in particular, the books, and this samskara. So we're given a very simple version. So chant 50 rounds before conception. So him and his wife, they very carefully chanted 15 rounds, and it was successful. They obtained a son. But the interesting thing is the son that came before they joined and the son that came as a result of the samskara, the 50 rounds, were totally different. And you might think, well, sure, because, one was the result of probably some, lusty activity, and the other one, well, you counted 50 rounds. But it was quite the other way around. Actually, the one that came prior, it was very attracted to Krishna consciousness. And this 50 round son, not so much. So that is indicative of the age of Kali, but it doesn't mean we should give up the effort. It's actually not possible to revive the Vedic process of purification in this age for want of proper facilities and lack of brahmanas. We don't have good brahmanas. Everyone, Kalo Sudra. But there is the Pancharatriki system, and that is recommended for this age. And this system acts on the Sudra class of men, which we are all. The population of Kali Yuga are all Sudras. And the prescribed purificatory process suitable to this age and time is given there. And such a purificatory process is allowed only for spiritual upliftment, not for any other purpose. And the spiritual upliftment is never conditioned by higher or lower parentage. So on all the different occasions for samskaras, especially during the time of birth, marriage, and death, wealth is distributed to the brahmanas. So in other words, if samskara is performed, and then wealth is distributed. Because, why? To the brahmanas. Because the brahmanas give the highest quality of service in regards to the prime necessity of humankind. And that charity was substantial. They just weren't handing out bananas, which is like quite common nowadays. It was substantial in the form of gold, land, villages, horses, elephants, food grains, and other materials for, ghee, etc., for cooking complete foodstuffs. So therefore, actually the brahmanas were not poor in the actual sense of poverty. On the contrary, because they possessed land, gold, villages, horses, elephants, and sufficient gains, they had nothing to earn for themselves. And they devoted themselves fully to the well-being of the entire society. It's interesting to note that during these ancient times, the cowherd community, who we see as living in villages, not supposedly being very developed, actually they were also not poor. Why? Because they were the possessor and caretakers to the cows, who give the beautiful form of religiosity in the form of milk, which then brings forth ghee. That is considered liquid religiosity. And other communities that didn't have access to the cows, they would come to the Vaishyas, to the cowherd community, to trade, and they would bring silks and fine cloths and ornaments and jewels and different types of foods, and the exchanges would be made. The wealth of the cowherd community coming from the cow, the curds, the ghee, in exchange for these other commodities. So the cowherd community was also in its own way quite wealthy due to the cows. Then there's this word tirtavit. Tirtavit is significant because the king knew well where, the kings they knew, especially Maharaj Yudhisthira, he knew well where and when charity has to be given. Charity is never unproductive or blind. In other words, it must be consciously applied. In the Shastra, charity was offered to persons who deserve to accept charity by dint of spiritual enlightenment. Quite often we're asked, why aren't you out there feeding the poor people? Actually, we're giving much more than food, but we are giving food in the form of prasadam. But the greater charity is our distribution of spiritual knowledge, whereby if one becomes spiritually involved, they'll be fully cared for by Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna is described as Vishnu, and this is significant because Lord Krishna, the original personality of Godhead, he he does the work of protection and annihilation, or meaning protection, in his capacity of Vishnu, his plenary expansion. So this word plenary, we hear it a lot. And from Webster Dictionary, it means complete in every respect, absolute. So therefore, Vishnu is complete in every respect, absolute, the same as Lord Krishna, but he has a specific, a specific interaction on behalf of the Supreme Lord, and that's to protect and annihilate. Lord Krishna's particular attributes are playing the flute, playing with the cows, etc., playing with the gopis. The Lord desires the conditioned souls hovering in this material creation to be reclaimed. Come on with me. Let's go back home, back to Godhead. And he helps us. He helps them by preparing the transcendental literatures like the Vedas, by sending missionaries, by sending this missionaries of saints and sages, and deputing his representatives, the spiritual master. So therefore, the spiritual master is never to be considered an ordinary person, because he's acting on behalf of Krishna for our welfare, for our benefit. And such transcendental literatures, missionaries, and representatives of the Lord are spotlessly white, because the contamination of the material qualities cannot touch them. Maharaj Parikshit is also described as spotlessly white because he is an unalloyed devotee of the Lord, Vishnu Rata, protected by the Lord. Kripacharya, who took part in the battle of Kurukshetra, and he joined the party of Duryodhana. Now, Duryodhana, we know he was opposing side. Kripacharya helped kill Abhimanyu, the father of Maharaj Parikshit. But still, he was held in high esteem by the family of the Pandavas due to his being a great Brahmana, as great as Dronacharya. This is really difficult for us to actually consider, especially now in this time of woke consciousness, like everything is being pulled apart and re-inspected, re-evaluated. But if we do this through the eyes, through the words of the Bhagavatam, we can understand. When the Pandavas were sent to the forest after being defeated in the gambling game, Dhritarashtra entrusted the Pandavas to Kripacharya for guidance. And at the end of the battle of Kurukshetra, Kripacharya again became a member of the royal assembly, and he was called during the birth of Maharaj Parikshit. He was called to recite auspicious Vedic hymns to make the ceremony of his birth successful. When preparing to depart for the Himalayas, Maharaj Yudhisthira entrusted Kripacharya with Maharaj Parikshit as his disciple. The great administrators, the kings and emperors, they were always under the guidance of learned brahmanas like Kripacharya. And in this way, they were able to properly act and discharge the duties of their political responsibilities. They weren't acting on behalf of their false egos or their material desires. So the family in which a Mahabhagavata takes his birth is fortunate, because due to the birth of a first grade devotee of the members of the family, past, present, and future, up to 100 generations, they become liberated by the grace of the Lord out of respect for his beloved devotees. And therefore, the highest benefit is done to one's family simply by becoming an unalloyed devotee of the Lord. I think I have mentioned in one of the classes about the mother of Jayananda Prabhu, an early devotee of Prabhupada, an early disciple, who died earlier due to a type of leukemia. And in those days, we weren't too broad-minded, it was just the devotees. We didn't think much about the family of the devotees. Krishna was thinking about the family of the devotee, particularly his mother. And years later, in 2006, like Jayananda, he was during Prabhupada times, he departed. Actually, Prabhupada wrote a beautiful letter to him after his departure. It was simply beautiful, saying that, perhaps you might, if you had still some material desires, then you'll get an opportunity by coming to a heavenly planet, or you may take birth in a well-to-do family. And then after that is finished, you will once again have the opportunity to finish by going back home, back to Godhead. So then he wrote later, but I think you have gone back to Godhead due to your unselfish desires. He helped Prabhupada early on. He received some money due to the death of his grandmother. And he took that money, $5,000, which at that time, that was a lot of money. And the devotees were outstandingly poor, most of us. And he took that money, offered to Prabhupada. And at first, Prabhupada said, no, you require some money. And this person, Jayanandi, was such a humble soul. He goes, I wouldn't know what to do with it, but you would know. And Prabhupada accepted, and he printed the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So anyway, his mother, the devotees initially kind of kept up with her after his departure, then they lost track of her. And then in 2006 in Boulder, Colorado, there was a young devotee who was a hospice nurse. She had just been initiated by Chandramauli Swami, actually. And she kept a supply of tulsi leaves and water from the holy places. She had things that, like, just in case there was somebody she could administer to at the time of death. Well, there was one old lady in the hospice room that she would chant. If the families weren't around, she would chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra in the ears of these dying patients. But this one old lady, she seemed like attracted. So one day she was going to work, this young girl, and as she left her apartment, she heard a voice telling her to put on tilak. What? She was thinking, put on tilak? I'm going to work. She walks toward the door, and again the voice, put on tilak. And again she's thinking, what is this? I'm going to work. But somehow she did it. And when she got to work, she thought, let me go see how this lady, the old lady who seemed to like the chanting, let me see how she's doing. She quietly opens the door and she sees the entire family is assembled, and she could understand that this lady was going to depart. They looked up at her, and the daughter in astonishment said, are you one of them? My brother was one of them. And I was praying to him last night for a sign, and now you're here. We don't know what to do. Sorry, that was my alarm. Turn it off. We don't know what to do. Can you help us? She's quite a young devotee, but whatever she learned, whatever she could understand, she offered to help. And they asked her to be the guest speaker at the memorial service. So Krishna, in the heart of this devotee, prompted her to act in such a way that the family recognized here was a devotee. And that lady who was dying was the mother of Jayananda. So the Lord never forgets his devotees, and he doesn't forget the family of the devotees. This is a very important thing to keep in mind. And the forefathers of Maharaj Yudhisthira, they were all great saintly kings. They were pious and glorified by their great achievements. And as a result, the members of the state, they were also happy and pious and well-behaved. They were prosperous and spiritually enlightened. So under the guidance of great souls and spiritual injunctions, saintly kings were trained at that time. And the result was a kingdom full of saintly persons and a very happy land of spiritual life. So the by astrological calculations, a child would be born in a high-level devotee of the Lord to follow in the footsteps of his forefathers. And this was the way of a state ruled by monarchy. The king should be pious, chivalrous, a devotee of the Lord, and fear personified for the upstarts. By such a saintly person, fear was personified for the upstarts, and must leave equally qualified successors. So in the modern setup of the so-called democratic states, the people themselves are fallen so much to the qualities of Sudras are less. So the governments that are being run by the representatives are full of ignorance of the scriptural mode of administration and education, and the whole world is surcharged with Sudra are less qualified, manifested by lust and avarice. And the administrators, they quarrel among themselves. The ministers are changed due to the party and group selfishness. Everyone wants to exploit the state resources, and no one retires from political life until forced to do so. So how, Prabhupada writes, how can such low-grade men do good to the people? They can't. The result is corruption, intrigue, and hypocrisy. So they should learn from the Srimad Bhagavatam how ideal administrators should be before taking such posts. The saintly kings give protection to all living beings to live and to fulfill our terms of imprisonment. And the kings become famous by these acts of charity, by yagyas, protection of all the surrendered. And a Kshatriya king is proud to give protection to the surrendered souls. And this attitude of a saintly king is called Ishwara Bhava, our factual power to give protection for the right cause. So, such an exalted devotee, King Ramti Devi, saw every living entity equally. And he directly perceived the real self, the Atman who is eternal and directly related to the Supreme Lord. And therefore the king completely engaged his body, mind, and word, his very self in the service of the Lord and his devotees. Ramti Devi never endeavored to earn anything. He would enjoy whatever came by the arrangement of providence. But when a guest would come, he would endeavor to give them everything. And in this way, he voluntarily underwent considerable suffering along with his family members. And sometimes he shivered for want of food and water, yet he always remained sober and undisturbed. So, we have 1 minute left. Well, I guess I should end this right now. I wasn't noticing the time. I beg your forgiveness for that.
No, Mother, you may continue as you wish. If you have more to say, yes, you are allowed to.
Just a few more words, if that's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
What does Srivas say? We can't hear him.
You may unmute. Okay.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much. You can speak for a few more minutes before.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just kind of didn't notice the timing.
It's good. We are enjoying, so keep speaking.
Yeah, well, I think probably you're knowing about this, how Ranti Dev, he had this long fast, I think it was like 48 days, and then he received some water and some eatables that were made with milk and ghee. And just as they were about to sit down, him and his family, because they also fasted, just about to eat, a Brahmin guest unexpectedly arrived. And because Ranti Dev would see the presence of the Lord, the Atman, and everyone and every living being, he received the guest with faith and respect, and he offered him his share of the food. And the Brahmin was so grateful. He ate his proportion and he went away. And then he took the remaining food, he divided it with his relatives, and he was just about to eat, they were about to eat. And a man from the Shudra class arrived. And seeing that Sudra in relationship with the Supreme Lord, Ranti gave him also a share of the food. And then as soon as that Shudra left, another guest arrived surrounded by dogs. Actually, the other night at a little center I have in Athens, Ohio. So we have been closed for the spring break, not spring break, the winter break. It's a college town. And we had a new guest and he came with a dog. And we hadn't actually ever considered that someone might bring a dog. And the devotees are kind of looking at each other, then they looked to me. And I remembered when Prabhupada first came, I also had a dog. In fact, the dog went to greet Prabhupada at the airport. And then he was in the temple also, sitting quietly. And I was thinking, this person has come. And it's it's a cold day and he's come with this dog and the dog is very peaceful. Just let him be here. He can learn and later he'll understand, because actually after a while, Prabhupada one time, we saw we were leaving the temple, the dog was leaving the temple. And then Prabhupada paused and he goes, perhaps it's better the dog stays outside. So I understood. And the dog, he stayed outside. He didn't go away from that then on. So I was remembering that. And I thought, if we say, no, you can't bring your dog, then he's going to go. And he won't get the opportunity to hear about Krishna and to take prasadam. And actually, it turned out this person was a practicing Buddhist, and he'd been to other Krishna temples. And it wasn't even his dog. It was his roommate's dog, but he was like taking care of it. And he was very happy to hear the words of the Bhagavad Gita, and he contributed greatly to the conversation that we had afterwards. And I could see that, obviously, if it was a temple with deities, it wouldn't be so appropriate. But it was just a little preaching center, a little Krishna house. And later on, if he keeps coming, which I think he will, he really was very favorably. Then he can learn about where the dog can stay as opposed to inside. Anyway, this person came with dogs, and King offered them all respect, King Ranti and obeisances, and he gave them the food. He gave the rest of the food to the dogs and the master. And then the only thing left was drinking water. And what happens? Some poor fatigued Chandala shows up and he gives him the water. So, who are these people who came just at that time? Ranti Dev was on the verge of dying for thirst, and yet without hesitation, he just gave his portion of the water to the Chandala. And he said, I don't pray to the Lord for the 8 perfections of mystic yoga or for salvation from repeated birth and death. I want to only stay among the living entities who are suffering and on their behalf, so perhaps I can assist them and serve them by offering my water to maintain the life of this poor Chandala who is struggling. I myself have been freed from all hunger and thirst and fatigue. So actually, who were these people who came? Suddenly the demigods, Brahma and Shiva, who can satisfy all material ambitious men, manifested their forms before Ranti Dev. It was they who had presented themselves as the Brahman, the Sudra, the Chandala, and so on. And because of Ranti Dev, who had no material ambitions, and because he was offering obeisances without hesitation, because he was actually attached to Lord Vishnu, he fixed his mind at the Lord's lotus feet, and he refused any material benedictions. And the sages wanted to get the offspring from the body of King. Actually, there was another case when the sages wanted to get offspring from the body of King Vena. You remember nasty King Vena? So anyway, they were doing this turning of his legs. And as a result, then Maharaj, this Maharaj Prithu came. Maharaj Prithu. So, there's so many incredible situations in the Bhagavatam that we can learn from. so many incredible personalities. So not only can devotees learn, but we can learn how to instruct the foolish people who are so-called administrators. Of course, we won't say, hey, you're a fool, because then they're not going to listen to us. But we can give them good advice taken from the pages of the Bhagavatam. We don't have to rearrange some psychological program. Give them the truth of the Bhagavatam, and we can do good for this whole world as well as ourselves. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mother Malati, as always. Thank you so much for being on our platform, blessing us with your wisdom and your presence. So at this point, we ask the devotees to show by the hand icon if they have any question for Mother. And Shrivat Manachari, if you have anything else to say. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Madam Malati, for your kindness. It's a great honor for us on this platform to have a senior Vaishnavi like you coming regularly to speak to us. And in fact, your humility is very moving. Your humility is very inspiring. It's exemplary. At the beginning of the lecture, you made some statements that touched me. You know, you're a proper disciple, you're a GBC, you have there from the beginning of ISKCON, you're one of the founding disciples of Prabhupada in ISKCON. Still, you feel so much humility in your heart. And then who are we? We are your disciples. All of us on this platform, of course, I don't know for everybody, but I know majority of us are your nieces and nephews. Yet you are telling us, and you are taking a humble position before us, and saying you are speaking for your own purification. I mean, is very touching. I feel very humbled by your disposition. So thank you very much for this example. Actually, they say example is better than precepts. Yeah, so your example is a big lesson for us. And so thank you. I'm very grateful for this. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna Mata.
Thank you so much, His Grace Shrivat Manachari. And you're absolutely right about that. Mother, I have a question. In Africa, there is this puzzle where it is said, does the egg produce the chicken or the chicken produces the egg?
I think that's universal.
Okay. Okay. So my question is, does Krishna's descent into this material world attract the alignment of the stars, the benevolent stars, or Krishna descends because of alignment of the benevolent stars? Which
I think it's both.
Okay.
As in one of the purports that I was reading, it was saying that even the Lord himself, it's like great saints they appear at a suitable time according to the alignment of the stars. And he said, even the Lord himself. It's not that the stars are forcing the appearance. It's that great sages and saints, saintly persons, they choose to appear at such a time. Or it may be that because of that time, their appearance is caused. But the Supreme Lord has no cause for his appearance or disappearance. So it's part of a lila, part of his presentation of himself into this world or another world if he chooses to go there. But he is the supreme controller in all times, place, and circumstances. So ultimately, it is through his desire. And as I was mentioning earlier, that his activities are often done by Vishnu. But Vishnu, a plenary portion of the Lord, is equal to and the same as the Supreme Lord. But this form as the Lord acts in certain cases and instances. The Vishnu form of the Lord doesn't enjoy with the gopis. The Vishnu form of the Lord doesn't play the flute. He doesn't chase the cows. He doesn't play rough and tumble with the cowherd boys. But he does so many wonderful things, and in potency, he's the same as the Lord.
Thank you so much, Mother. Thank you for the answer. And I don't know how convenient it might appear to you, but I would wish, and I'm sure the rest of the audience would also wish to hear a little bit about one special pastime. We usually read from Srila Prabhupada's Lamrita here in Gita Nagari on Sundays. And this very past Sunday, that's why it's so fresh on my mind.
Okay.
We read about how 3 young couples of Srila Prabhupada from Los Angeles, establishing ISKCON in Los Angeles, had to travel to London to establish ISKCON. And
we were from San Francisco.
Oh, San Francisco, yeah, San Francisco.
Yeah.
So you are one of those 3 couples. And obviously you were young, both in age and in your devotional service. Yet you were able to accomplish what Srila Prabhupada oftentimes will be proud of, that even his guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, sent sannyasis and couldn't start it. So
he said when we were leaving, he said, my Guru Maharaj sent sannyasis. I am sending grihastas.
So if you may be kind
and
enough.
then I had a little baby, and he said,
Saraswati.
Yeah, she was like 6 weeks old. Hand me the child. So I handed him he was sitting, handed him the child, and he held her to his chest, but facing out, right? And he had a garland on, and he flipped the garland around both of them. And then he said, now they will say, what kind of sannyasa is this? Referring to his godbrothers who had been complaining, oh, Swami Maharaj has gone to America and is associating with the Malechas, So he quipped, joked. Now he's holding my daughter, and he set the garland on them both. Oh, now they will say, what kind of sannyasa is this? But I'll tell you another interesting thing.
Okay,
so we stopped in Montreal on our way to come to London, and specifically to receive his blessings. He was there waiting for some type of permanent visa to America. And when we arrived, we didn't know where he was staying because the temple itself was an old bowling alley. So it wasn't really equipped for living, although the devotees were living there. There was a very interesting living arrangement. There was just like ropes were like tied in different directions, and then sheets were clipped to the ropes with clothespins, so forming little rooms, and the walls of the rooms were these sheets. So you can imagine how much privacy that was. Anyways, obviously he wasn't staying there. They got an apartment, and I wanted to see him immediately. And I said to Janaki, let's go find Swamiji. And she goes, how? I said, well, just walk around until we see some orange cloth hanging out, because I knew they would hang clothes out. Sure enough, we found some orange cloth. We got knocking on the door, and Govinda Dasi, who was serving with her husband Gaura Sundar, answered the door. And she turned, she goes, Swamiji, the San Francisco devotees are here. And he looked up, he said, come in. And I'm holding the baby. And I got right to the entry he had to step down a step to where he was, his room where he was staying. He wasn't sleeping in that room, but it was like the front room. So his little desk was there, his desk meaning a low table. He looks at me, he goes, oh, this very morning, I had a dream about this very child. And then he repeated it. I dreamt about this very child this morning. I was so astounded. And it was, as a mother, first-time mother, it was so pleasing that he recognized my daughter through that I didn't even say, oh, what was the dream? I didn't ask him. And he didn't mention, and he didn't have to, because just that recognition was so wonderful.
Oh, so beautiful, so beautiful. So, as a matter of encouragement, if you'll be kind enough to share with us how at such a tender age, both in body and in devotional service, you still were able to carry out Sri Prabhupada's instructions. Maybe some of us might benefit.
One word, commitment.
Commitment.
We were committed to this. We didn't know, I mean, come on, even like old in our devotional lives. The only book were the 3 volumes of the Bhagavatam practically, and then the Macmillan edition of Bhagavad Gita. We didn't have a lot of ammunition. There were no cell phones, there were no internets, thank God, actually. But we were committed to this service. And even during, we didn't even get to, we arrived, there were no funds, we were living scattered around. It wasn't like there was never any problems, but we were committed. So whatever the problems, we just push them aside. This isn't the time for these problems. We are here, we were on a mission, and we were committed to that mission. And I think that commitment, if was more applied nowadays, there would be less problems. It's not that there wouldn't be problems, there would be less, because we, instead of being ruled by the problems, we were being energized by our commitment to Srila Prabhupada. A book I would recommend reading is the book by Giriraj about I'll Build You a Temple.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of nuances in there besides the actual details of what happened, how it happened, yada, yada. But the undercurrent of Vaishnava activities, the Vaishnava culture of serving the spiritual master and being ruled by that desire to please Prabhupada and serve the mission. It wasn't a small thing.
Thank you so much, Mother. It's just one word, commitment, but it's very heavily loaded. So thank you so much. We have one with a question.
We have commitment in marriage, right?
Yes.
Commitment is a big factor in Krishna conscious lifestyle.
Yes. Thank you so much. Shri Prabhu, you may go ahead and ask your question. Hare Krishna. Please on. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
My Dandavat Pranam Mataji, Oblo Srila Prabhupada, thank you for your wonderful lecture. I have 2 questions. One is about Maharaj Parikshit's conduct to the Brahmana. You said that you said that the curse of the son of the Brahmana is unjust. But I have I've heard before that the conduct of Maharaj Parikshit was also not very sattvic, or it's like an offense.
That may be. That may be.
Shri Prabhu, excuse me, there appears to be some noise at your background.
Yeah.
Can you?
So actually, I'm in the marketplace. Okay. Is it okay now? It's okay now?
There is noise at the background.
Yeah.
I'm in the market. I'm in the market. So please forgive me for the noise.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just to clarify that there was a misuse of power on the side of Maharaj Parikshit, which was justified by scripture or by explanation that this was in order to cause something to happen. Then sometimes pure devotees may act in a way that may not be very palatable, but there is some greater benefit behind it. So I'm just trying to find out, can we really say that the cause of the Brahmana is unjust because he was simply reacting to the offense that was committed to his father?
Yeah.
So that's my first question.
Right.
I will ask the second one now. Right.
First of all, he was a young Brahmana, son of a Brahmana. He wasn't a full-fledged Brahmana in that he did not, he hadn't completed, he was a young person. He hadn't completed his Brahminical training. So he might have known the rules and regulations, but he didn't know practical application of the same. Many Kanishtas are pre-Kanishas are like that. They know the rule, they knew the regulation, but they don't know how to apply. Just like the word subtle was used in terms of the Vedic Malaysian literature. And, Krishna consciousness is full of subtle nuances. So that's one thing. That boy, he did not know how to properly utilize the knowledge he had. Now, so far as Maharaj Pariksit, he was sinless, period. It was a minor transgression, born from hunger and thirst. But it wasn't a sinful activity. So that we have to keep in mind. And again, we're such gross people, like in Kali Yuga, we're all Sudra. We have been given the opportunity through the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and our spiritual masters to raise ourselves up. But, Prabhupada in one of his purports said, sometimes we need to remember where we came from. And even if you have come from a Brahmana family, chances are in Kali Yuga, the Brahmana families, they're also not so high-level Brahmanas in most cases. So he was undeserving of the curse coming from a boy, an upstart boy, you could say, who himself was acting out of passion and anger to see his father, what he thought to be disrespected. So, of course, the overall situation was to allow, the glories of Maharaj Pariksit to be observed and for this Bhagavatam to be spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. So, everything had its little part in the puzzle there.
Okay, thank you. Can I go the second question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we know that there are 8,400,000 species of living entities, and we often hear that 400,000 is the human species.
Yeah.
So is it right to say that the devas are also part of the Manusya of the human species?
Can somebody mute themselves because it's like, or maybe it's the Devas. I don't know. Maybe we're muting the Devas.
No, did you hear me? Did you hear my question?
I heard your question.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a background turn off. Like,
Yeah, I think she heard your question, sir. If you may mute.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Yeah. To be very honest, I don't know that I could answer that question with any authority. There's been recently some discussions on this, 400,000 species, human species of life. And then people are thinking, okay, Chinese, Africans, America, like what are the species? But then one of the learned Brahmin devotees was pointing out that's really not, how it's determined. But I could not really understand his explanation because it was very scientifically and shastrically kind of interesting. I'm not even going to attempt to try to repeat it. But I don't think that the Devas, well, no, that's not true, because the Devas are in temporary atmospheres. In other words, they may have very long lives, according to our consideration. But there is an end to the life, so in that way they could be considered part of the 400,000. But I cannot say that with any absolute authority. So sorry about that.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mother.
Okay.
So anyone with any questions before we let Mother go? Mother Malati, this past weekend, His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj had a virtual sangha. And
Yeah, I heard about it after the fact.
yes, there were almost 1,000 audience. And when Maharaj came on, he took a minute or two to try to look at all the devotees and beautifully showered us with his blessings. And His Holiness Jaya Pataka Maharaj also, oftentimes when he has darshans virtually, he will oftentimes say that, thank you for allowing me into your homes. So as we've seen you, you have visited us in our homes. So our prayers and our humble request is that you bless us with at least a bit of the commitment you've had for Srila Prabhupada all these years, so we can also be useful in Srila Prabhupada's movement. It's a humble request. Hare Krishna.
I will try my best, but I don't think I have the ability to, as someone like Radhanath Swami Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, Jayapataka Maharaj, to bless you. At the same time, I can pray that Srila Prabhupada's words enter into your heart and become an active, visible part of your daily lives.
Thank you so much.
And that
Thank
his presence is always there with you.
Thank you so much, Mother. We all thank you greatly. I thought we were going to end, but it seems Harichakra has something to say. Harichakra Prabhu. Well, Harichakra Prabhu usually is quiet, but I think seeing you, he cannot be silent. So, Harichakra, you may unmute. And Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mother Malati.
Haribol, Harichakra Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
All glory to your Lord feet. My question is, I mean, it's like a similar, it's in line with what Vara Prabhu was just asking. I've heard from somewhere, I've not read it myself, that when we talk about the species of life, especially the human species, it's not like physical species, like the physical body species, but it's a what do we call it? Level of consciousness. I've heard, and I don't know how factual it is, that it's different level of consciousness that is referred to as a species. Do you have any idea about it? I just to kill my curiosity.
Well, instead of trying to speak at this moment on the topic, after the last question, I made a mental resolve is I'm going to try to find out more about this and report back to you. So the same goes.
Thank you so much, Mother. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mata.
It's definitely an
Thank you.
interesting topic, but you know, we don't want to be mental speculators. So I will see what I can come by way of firm information.
Thank you, Mata.
Thank you so
And
much.
thank you for being on our platform. Anytime I see you, then I try my best, wherever I am, to just listen to you. I love to hear your pastime.
You're in a car right now, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's work.
You're not driving, are you?
No, I'm not driving. I'm not
Okay.
driving.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mata. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. My obeisances to everyone. All glories
Hare
to Sri
Krishna.
Prabhupada.
All
Thank
good.
you again.
Yeah.
Haribol.
So at this point, we ask all the devotees to kindly unmute, and then we chant Big Hare Krishna to express our appreciation for Mother's presence here today. Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai
Jai.
Hai
All
Grace
the
Malati Devi Dasi ki Jai.
Jai. Very well.